Tack.
I wrote the storyline, Refugees in the World, because I felt it was absolutely necessary to try to help our children to understand a little how it is to be a refugee. But we hear about them all the time on the news and everywhere, and I know it is difficult, but it is worth a try. I wrote the topic in 2019, and then I had in mind the war in Syria. But now, 2 years later, we have another war in Ukraine. I feel that I decided not to change the topic for this presentation, but I think it's very easy to adapt it to whatever war will be in the world. Of course, I hope there won't be many, but I'm afraid they will. So it is kind of geared into Syria, but I think it can be adapted to other wars. I came across very interesting books by Jerry Roberts, Louis Spilsbury, and Hannah Kay. They were published in Iceland, but they are translated from books written in English, and the names of the books are Poverty and Hunger, Refugees and Migrants, Global Conflict, Racism and Interference. And I have to say, they're really good books. And you can see how they fit together as a globe. And as I said, we have those books in Icelandic, and I know they were translated into other languages in Europe. So maybe you have them in your country. In my topic, I also use a book that you see a picture of. We call it in Icelandic Fólk á flótta, or People on the Run. And it is an Icelandic book and has not been translated, but I'm sure that you can find similar books in your language or your country, and then you can also use the internet always. And there are a lot of web pages and pictures and videos and whatever about this subject. So the storyline itself, I have called Refugees in the World. And as I said before, it was written in 2019 originally. And then I was thinking about the war in Syria. You can see my email there. So now I have translated this topic into English. And if you would like to have it, you can easily just contact me and I will send it to you. Before we start the real topic, I find it necessary to have some kind of a prelude. And we start with reading the book Racism and Interference, which is one of the 4 books I mentioned. And then we discuss the book, especially the concepts prejudice, race, respect, and tolerance. And I think it's very important to explain those concepts. They are complicated and they're widely used in the world when we are talking about like wars and refugees and things like that. And it's important that we understand that we have to help the children to learn the meaning. So my suggestion is that we have a workbook where we have glossaries. So we take a few words every time we work and explain them, write them down in their own workbook. I usually have small workbooks, something I learned in Scotland a long time ago, something that they have as a souvenir after every topic. But it can also be done in a different way, like on a computer or so on. Then I think it would be good to have posters on the wall with the concepts and explanation. The first chapter, so I thought of where do refugees come from? And I start this chapter with a soundtrack of bombing, and that can easily be found on the internet, and ask the question, what is this? And I think they all know. And then the question, what happens to people or children that live where there is war? And then back to the glossaries, what does it mean to be a refugee? And where do most refugees come from? And even though now on the news, it's only about the war in Ukraine, there are refugees from other places in the world. And there are wars in other places in the world. And there is a war in Yemen that is not very often mentioned in the news. So I think we should do some research, and I suggest that you make a big map of the world and maybe mark in where refugees come from. And I always find it good to have friezes and posters on the wall. It's then very easy for a teacher to refer to it, maybe start the day by looking at one or two concepts, or look at what we did yesterday and things like that. So I have always found friezes on the wall very helpful. And then we think of the children as refugees, and I want them to try to imagine how it is to be a refugee child. So they make their own, as we often do in Storyline. And I think it can be done in more than one way. The teacher can decide which country we are focusing on, so where he or she wants the refugees to be from, or if we have it totally free, that they can choose where their refugee child is from. So, and then you would do the same thing as we usually do in Storyline. What is the name? How old are they, and where are they from, and what are their interests and hobbies and parents and whatever information you would like them to have about their child. And then there is the question, when you have to leave your country, where do refugees go to? And very often we have those big refugee camps that we see on the news all the time. But if you are focusing on Ukraine, there is a different situation I was thinking about last week, that we haven't seen any big refugee camps because most of or all of the countries in Europe have kind of opened the doors for the refugees. So it is a different situation. So I think if you are working on this topic with older children, I think you should discuss this, that we don't open our doors for all people in the world, just some of them. So this can be done in it can be a different solution to how you do this. Maybe I should just mention, I think you could use this topic for a wide age range. I think you could use it for quite small children, maybe 9, 10, and then up to 16 if you wanted to. Then it would be much more complicated and more of discussions of controversial matters. And then we want them to try to imagine the life of their refugee child in a camp, and also the life of others. And it would be nice to make some kind of a frieze of a refugee camp. And then the third chapter, we read the book Refugees and Migrants, and have some refugees travel to safe countries and write the imaginary story for the refugee child, for the one you made. Find stories of real children. This can be, I found quite many stories on the internet and also in newspapers in Iceland. And then we want to continue with the glossary and teachers decide how many concepts they explain. And then there is the fourth chapter.
Ostanut sen asunnon Naantalista just nyt.
Live in a new country. And we investigate stories about refugees in your own country and try to have a refugee come to your classroom if that is possible. And I think it would be a good idea to go to the Red Cross to find out if that was possible. And the last chapter, I always end my storylines with an evaluation, and I usually do it that way that I write some questions on the blackboard or whatever board you have in your classroom, and I have the children answer the questions individually first, and I usually do it in the end of the workbook. So this would be kind of the last page of the workbook of the topic, and then when they have kind of considered it themselves, then we share and discuss what they learned, what would they have liked to do better, what was their favorite part of the storyline, what did they not like, and what could we do better in the next storyline. And then, of course, after that, we have the parent evening I told you about in the beginning. I think that is what I want to tell you today. Thank you.
Yes, can you stop sharing? And then maybe we have some questions here in the room. I see we have participants on the net and also a lot of people here in the room, Björg.
Oh, nice.
Like
nice.
20 people.
Oh, hello to all of you. I hope this has been useful. I find that this is very important for us to talk about this with our children in our privileged world here in the Nordic countries and other Western countries.
Oops, there went your 15 minutes. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Let's see, how long does this storyline last?
I would think it would be like 2 or 3 months, depending on how deep you would go into it. I think it's a rather open storyline, so it depends a lot on the teacher, how they would organize it and how much work they would put into it.
And a very, very angelägen, what's that in English? Very good question, I think, is how do the children react to this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What reactions do you meet?
Yes, and then I think if you investigate, what's happening in your own country. I mean, there are refugees even coming to Iceland, even though we are far away, and everywhere in Europe there have been a lot of refugees the last decades.
So what are the feelings from the pupils in the classroom?
I think they like to help. And when I worked on it, the only time I worked on it, we also kind of had, in the end, what can we do? And I think that depends on the teacher, how far into that you would go.
Yeah.
But of course, I think it's a good idea to kind of try to ask them if there is something we can do about this, even though we are small.
Yes, and we can also see that Ukrainian refugees do not stay in the countries nearby.
No.
They go on further. So
yeah, we already have quite many in Iceland.
Very angeläget. We're looking for a word.
Yeah.
urgent
Yes, okay.
subject.
Yes,
Yes. We have a question.
Okay.
Do you want to come here? It's probably easier since I can't turn this around so you can see all the people here.
Hi, thank you for a good presentation.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, I mean, we have so many refugees now. Have you worked with this with refugees in your class?
No,
Can you?
no. They were only
Your reaction how to work around it? Because we have-
no, there were no refugees, but we have them now in our school, but not many.
No, because I
I
think
had a few from Syria last year, and then from Afghanistan. I remember.
because we have them a lot in our classes.
Yes, I can
So it's
imagine.
how to
Yeah, and they are coming into
them in this theme because it's really important for the other kids.
Yes, of course you have to be considered to their situation, but I think maybe they would also feel good that the children are trying to understand how they feel.
Yeah.
We
And
have
also
to
this
leave their country.
storyline was from 9. What did you say?
Yeah, I thought about it. Mine were 11. I think if you young, it would be fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, because we in Sweden we tend not to talk to the children about this because we don't know what memories can come flashing.
No, you have to be very careful, but
Yeah.
investigate a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
their background and.
Yeah, you probably know your students, then you know what to do. Right. Well, any more questions? I don't think. Oh, here we have more from the chat. Here, let's see. Oh, many questions. How many lessons a week?
When you do a storyline, and if you're a class teacher, I find often that I work on it a little bit almost every day if I can. Not always, a whole lesson, maybe just go over the concepts or talk about what we did yesterday. So, but we usually have like 3 times a week, 2 lessons each time.
Yeah. Thank you. And here is one more. How do children react to the theme of war? That was what we really talked about earlier, but
yes, yeah. And it is on the news all the time. So I think
they need to.
Yeah, I think we need to address it. I mean, there are a lot of serious matters that we need to talk about at school. I've had a lot of discussion about death with teachers,
Yes.
Should we talk about that in school?
And then we can do it in a storyline.
Yes, we can. And I have done that. So
very, very interesting. Any more questions in the room? No? I think they're satisfied here. Well, thank you so much. Very, very interesting listening to you. And then we applause again, maybe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.